Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Marianne Barth. I'm an administrator, counselor, and also a coordinator for a program. The program helps students transition from school to work for students who have disabilities, and welcome. So we'll be discussing school to work transition for students with disabilities. We have 4 learning outcomes. So number 1 is to identify the 4 main components of school to work transition for students with disabilities. To understand how the 4 main components are team driven, and to identify the factors or segments of each of the 4 main components, and to identify the challenges and the opportunities of working with students with disability for school to work transition overall. This program has 4 different components. Let me list those for you. 1 is job readiness and the support for that. Case management, vocational and technical training, maybe technical training as well as vocational training, as well as support. So I'll go on and explain each of those components. For job readiness and development of those assistance and support, there is meetings upon meetings. There's always a ton of meetings. So before things happen, we have a meeting, and then we'll have an introductory meeting, and then we'll have a more in-depth meeting to discuss things that have been going on. There's very much a team approach. There must be a team approach for all throughout the program. So we also have the consumers themselves or clients. We have the parents or caregivers. We also have administration and school people who will be part of this as well, who have been part of the student encounter. And so we also will have other agencies such as VR, developmental delay services, and so an inclusive approach for our students. For readiness, we have to have assessment. It's not formal. We have formal and informal assessments. So for informal assessments, we would sit down with a student or client, find out what their interests are, what they're not particularly interested in, what their goals and dreams are, and we'll go through and clarify those. So the informal is very, I would say, rudimentary, but it'll give them an idea of whether or not they want a very quick pace or not very quick pace sort of environment to work in. So a more formal assessment will be a written assessment or an assessment done on the computer, and you'll just write down or document those answers. So we'll talk about a few of those different kinds of assessments. You can see on the slide there, it's OASIS. You'll also see some of the other ones, DAT, that's on the slide as well. The ASVAB, ASVAB. So those are more formal assessments. Keep in mind that this is very reliant on a student's ability and aptitude in written English and their ability to translate that information for themselves. So job readiness is where we identify job openings for that particular student. If there is a job opening, is that a realistic job for them? And we'll help them develop a plan of action. Another is called soft skills. We may assume that a student or a client understands what to do when they arrive, that they must arrive to work on time, that they must attend their, go to lunch and come back, but please don't make that assumption that they know that. Those things must be explicitly taught to students. What are those soft skills that are included? What are the ethics included that are necessary? Working in that environment, and who will they be working with? We may need to make some adaptations for the student. Let's say, for instance, today you have to arrive at 9, but tomorrow might be 10 o'clock. So they'll have to adjust to their work schedule. A student must be able to support themselves, which means I may need an interpreter for this encounter. Or I can't see something, so I need you to probably enlarge that. And so those are accommodations that may need to be done, and you have to encourage the students to go ahead and address those needs and let that be known. Those are soft skills. Job readiness is not only for the student or client, it's also for the employer as well as the other employees as well. Perhaps there is a need for some sort of adjustment or modification for the student or client to begin their work there. Perhaps if the schedule is everyone starts at 8 o'clock, but transportation is an issue, and will not arrive until 8:45. Perhaps the student can arrive at 8:45 due to transportation needs. So there may also be the need for job restructuring. Perhaps the job itself is a job that the student may not be able to handle, and there may need to be an adjustment to that job. So the job can be restructured. Perhaps that student can just be moved to another position, or moved. Maybe one student can do one particular job and another student is more fitted for the other job, so they can just switch jobs or restructure the job. Accommodations, I know there's this big law out there called the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act. And those accommodations require employers as well as other places for the employer to accommodate the needs of that student. Accommodations for students would be such as a number of other things. The boss and the employee themselves and the students can be taught what to do and how to approach this particular client or student. Oftentimes the employer is, ill at ease with the situation and do not know how to address the situation. So we're there to help transition the student and educate the employer with the student and explain to them what would need to happen with students and with the other people who work there. Okay. So now we're moving on to case management. Case management, a lot happens in case management. There's quite a bit of work involved. Again, case management is a team approach. You need input from the school, because the student has grown up there, from parents or their caregiver, agencies, and the student or the client themselves have all got to be on this team so that we can all consider a plan together. Case management would include quite a number of different things. And I'll touch on each one of these for you. And we're seeing some of these more and more, that we sit with a student and we ask them questions and they've got to answer a whole host of questions. And you need to go ahead and, even if it's not included in our slides, do whatever is necessary to make the student successful in this situation. So what is a job versus a career? You may need to explain that. I know we tend to use those words interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. So you may need to explain to a student what is a job and what is a career. Also, transportation. What does transportation actually include? Can a student get a driver's license or not? Can the student perhaps use public transportation like a bus? Maybe they live very far away from the bus line and there's no bus line near them. Again, that's part of your responsibility in case management to find out what's available to that student. It may be a wonderful thing to get a great job, but if transportation is not dependable, then it will break down the whole situation. Housing is another issue. For them to learn how to live on their own, as well as independent living skills. There may be the need for a group home, but where will that be located? Where is the housing? What is exactly included in housing for them? If they want to live independently, do they know how to cook? Do they know how to wash clothes? Do they know how to do the whole host of things that are needed under housing? What do they need for the job itself? Sometimes it requires special clothing or shoes or specialized equipment for that particular job. Whatever it is that they need, perhaps it's a visual calendar or a visual schedule that will tell them what it is they need to do, when is maybe break time or lunch time. And so the calendar may need to include all that information, including holidays. Whatever it is that they need to help that student become as independent as possible. Healthcare. Healthcare, many students do not understand what they need for healthcare. How to go and make an appointment for a doctor's appointment, for a dentist appointment, how to make these appointments and what to do, because they've never had to do them before. So teaching the student how to do that. Once you arrive to your appointment, what do you do then? There's usually a stack of papers to fill out. Can the student fill them out? And if not, let me back up for just a second. There may be the need for a binder with personal information in it that they can utilize to transfer this information from their personal information onto the paperwork they would need for their first doctor appointment. Understanding that doctors and hospitals, they have many different forms that need to be filled out. So, discussing disability laws and students' rights. Many people do not understand their rights. They've never studied the laws or know their rights. They've gone into meetings and they've had things explained around them, but may never have really understood what the law itself included. And depending on a student's cognitive level, you've got to teach them the law. They don't know necessarily where to go for help. So you can have a binder or a portfolio, and that would be a place where you would store papers with disability laws and rights and everything, private information, that the student could utilize for different resources that they would need to get help with certain situations. Now, it's possible for them to get this help. Independent living skills. Wow. You have to think of everything from the time that you wake in the morning until you rest yourself at night. You may think that these are rudimentary things that you do on a daily basis, but for many students, they don't understand, how do I shower? What do I do with shampooing or brushing my teeth or deodorizing and other grooming that they need. You will have to teach those explicitly. So it's helpful to have a list that they can check off each task in the morning so that they know what to do next. You may need to, once you've groomed yourself in the morning, you may need to eat, and then you will need to teach healthy food versus junk food. You'll need to be explicit about what time to eat in the morning, what time to leave in the morning, once you get to your job, what to do at that job, and when you're finished working, what you do when you get back home. It may be time to wash laundry. So teaching them how to launder their own clothes, teaching them how to use the proper amount of detergent, as well as the washing settings on a machine and drying settings, folding and ironing, button sewing, all of those things that you would do in your own independent. Also, money is one of those skills. How to make money, how to spend money, how to save money, budgeting skills are necessary. If an item has a cost, you have to compare it to how much money a student has. Many students have never shopped before. Parents have always purchased things for them and provided for them, and so the students do not know how to grocery shop or how to shop for their own clothing. So you have to be explicit. You have to have direct teaching. That is part of case management. If you can find an agency to partner with in case management, that is an option. Another is child care. Many do not necessarily know how to take care of children, and so that is part of case management. If you have children, you go to work, who's going to care for the child while you're at work? For case management, you want as much information as possible. And there's quite a bit of information. You're going to glean that information from school, from the school itself, from teachers, administrators, support staff. Gain as much information as you can. They've seen that child grow up. You can also glean information from a student's IEP and other testing assessments. It's called an ETR MFE. All of the information is valuable. You can also get information from agencies. Agencies can provide some information and other information they cannot provide. Some agencies can provide some information, but not others, and another agency will be able to help fill in some of those gaps and work and coordinate together with those agencies' information that you get. Parents and other caregivers who help care for that student. It's important that as a student transitions from school to work, there are some things that you need to be aware of. Parents are often resistant to this transition. They want to care for their child. They want to be there for them, help them, but we need to convince them to let go. Case management is very much a team approach, as much as job readiness is also a team approach. A third component is vocational training. Again, you may feel that there's so much analysis in this, but you're going to have to truly find out what the student needs to become successful in their job. You need to find out what it is that aligns with the student's motivation, their dreams, their hopes, and match that with the kind of job. You don't want an egregious mismatch. Perhaps they have, a second or third grade math level, or they want to become an accountant though, and that may not be a match for them at all. So you need to guide a student or consumer to their realistic goals. It must be a realistic job. We do have assessments, a variety of different assessments, to assess their academic skills, what is their reading level, and then their comprehension level. Sometimes a student can read right along and it may not be very challenging, but may not have the comprehension to go with that same level. So you'll need to measure their reading as well as their comprehension. They'll need to write to communicate. They don't have to write expertly, but can they write notes to their employer or other employees and be understood? Also, math. Math is a necessary skill for budgeting and for everything that happens in life. Anything that you would need to take care of your home. Independent living skills, there's an assessment for that as well. For the student to know how to take care of laundry, to take care of the house, to shop. We need to teach those explicitly. Those are direct services for teaching a student directly how to do these things. So if you can't teach those yourself, then you must partner with someone who can teach those skills. The next category is social. Is socialization appropriate in the workplace or inappropriate? How to address your employer, how to address other employees. Is communication successful? What are those boundaries for communication? You have to teach boundaries directly. That's the world of work is very different compared to the environment a student finds himself at school. What is appropriate and what is inappropriate? If you have an oops or a faux pas, what do you do then? The next component is job placement. Once I go to work, what must I do? What are the steps to accomplish part 1, part 2, part 3, so that the student can be successful? What else is necessary for the student to keep the job? Maybe easy to get a job, and then the student will be quickly fired. What does it mean to maintain the job? What are those conflict resolutions? How to approach people? What happens when there's a conflict and you lose your temper? What to do and how to teach what to do when things happen. That will include things such as role playing. must reinforce, review, and then reteach and repeat, and repeat, and repeat. It is, again, a team approach. Again, for support, that's our fourth component, support. Support will come from the school. And it's interesting that some people never even think of providing information, and you may have to ask for that information, even so much as asking the janitor or even the cafeteria workers. Those are the people you can glean information from about our student or client. Also, if a student has asked for any kind of standardized test, and we need to get a good picture in our minds of how the student has grown up. Maybe they've met with the counselor at school as well and get information from them. The parents and caregivers, you may need to sit down and ask the parent about their job, and ask them, what do I do every day? And just have this dialogue, this communication with the student. It doesn't have to be anything formal, but if the parent sits down and explains that to a student, and the student knows, then they become more of an adult, and they become independent. And many caregivers have said, wow, this is working for me now. Support from agencies, assessments, the job search itself, having those matched with the student. They may provide job coaches, and the job coaches need to be trained. Keep in mind that all students and all job coaches are not necessarily a perfect match. So don't be afraid if, say, a student is going right along in the process and we're trying to match a job coach to them. Don't be afraid to take a moment and step back and reassess the situation. And if you come to the realization that this is not a match, go ahead and reassess that, because the goal in the end is for the student to become successful. If there's a mismatch and you continue, the success of the job will not be there. Agencies can be supportive and can help write resumes, cover letters, can provide interviewing skills and mock interview skills where you dress up for your interview and you discuss how to approach an employer. If you're deaf or hard of hearing, you may need to explain how to use an interpreter, where the interpreter will need to sit. And what happens if the boss starts asking, what kind of disability do you have? And the frustration in that moment, how to handle that. So you have to practice these things. Students and clients, you need to support them with what they need. Explain to them. You may need to explain to them by going back and saying, you have a disability. Don't assume that they themselves understand that they have a disability. Don't assume that. Your disability, and what does that mean? You'll need to explain that explicitly. What are your challenges? And what kind of word choices they'll need to use. For example, I'll give you an example. How do you work well? What does well mean for them? That word well, if you have, so the interviewing process, maybe a student will need an interpreter. So you need to be able to explain what an interpreter does and where they sit. And maybe explain to them what happens if the boss says, what kind of disability do you have? Oh, what do I do then? They're not, some ask that during an interview, and you'll need to address, what do I say when somebody asks me this? I know I learned they're not supposed to ask me this, but they've asked me this. How to handle that. You need to teach them how to approach that situation when it happens in the appropriate way. You also need to teach them how to support themselves. How to have them ask for things during an interview or on the job. How to ask for those supports. Many times students will sit back and say, oh, I have all these things that I need, but I'm afraid to ask. You'll need to teach them how to be assertive. Again, it's a team approach. Everyone is included in that team. You're going to collect information about students' interests, their goals, their dreams, their work, their independent living, all of these things. Students/clients need to understand themselves, who they are, what their disability is, and what will be a success and challenge for them. They need to understand and learn, and need to be shown how to make these decisions. And also conflict resolution skills. You may need to use role play to show them how to utilize these skills. Understanding what the world of work means. I've done that before. Skills require, what do they need to do every day? What are their skills that are required for this job? And what they need to do to maintain this job. They may need to learn how to troubleshoot. Need to figure out what's working for me and what's not working for me. The job coach is also helpful to figure out what it is that's helpful for the student and what is not. Students, like I've said before, they need to have the information that's collected about them from the school, from agencies. We must have collaboration with agencies. If the agency is doing this but doesn't know that the other agency is doing this as well, we need to coordinate and work together. We need to gather information from the parents and from the students. All of the information that is shared is shared for the entire team so that we are all on the same page. Remember, students with a disability, when they transition from school to work, in the midst of that transition, they must learn how to work and become an employee. They must learn how to do that. Really, that transition, what does it mean to transition from school to work? Sometimes it feels like not working or underemployment. It feels like a trap. And they feel trapped. Now remember that students, clients, they need to learn as they transition from school to work. They need to learn how to work, how to become an employee, and they need to imagine the traps and pitfalls. which can be twofold: unemployment and underemployment. We need to eliminate those. And once we bypass those traps or pitfalls, we now have a gap. And that gap is inappropriate training for jobs, or a job and student mismatch. We need to smooth out that process for them. We need to work through that gap. And in order to do that, we provide a bridge for them. That bridge is the agencies, the parents, the students, all working together to transition a student from school to work. That collaboration is the bridge. So basically, the goal is successful employment, so that everything works out well. Okay. This quote is from the Pacer Center. And it says, truly successful transitional process is the result of a comprehensive team approach, which means planning, and that planning happens with the students. It begins with the student's dream, with their motivation and passion, their wants, their abilities, and the program for transition is preparing that student or client for life, for work, and for play, and for success in the community, to be as independent as possible. That is the ultimate goal, to have this transition from school to work for students with disabilities. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Bye.